I finally found the box hidden in the attic, but the adoption decree inside didn't just rewrite my past. It confirmed my father was alive. And now, a professional killer is chasing me for what's inside the photo. The dust motes danced in the single shaft of afternoon sun cutting through the gloom of the attic room. It wasn't really an attic anymore, not since Mom had insisted on converting the eaves into a cozy guest nook. But the air still hung thick and heavy with the scent of aged wood and forgotten things. I was up here because I was finally decluttering before the big move, selling the house my parents had lived in for 40 years. 40 years of solid, unshakable certainty about who I was, where I came from, and what my life meant. I pulled out a stack of moth-eaten blankets, sneezing violently. My mattress, a cheap, sagging twin from college, needed to go next. As I wrestled the frame away from the sloped wall, my foot snagged on something solid. It wasn't the floorboards. It was something tucked tightly against the base of the bed frame, hidden perfectly by the dust ruffle Mom had insisted on keeping for nostalgic charm. I knelt down, brushing away decades of accumulated grime. It was a box, not one of those flimsy cardboard boxes full of old school reports, but a real, heavy wooden chest about the size of a shoebox, stained a deep, almost black mahogany. It wasn't locked, just closed tight. My heart gave a strange, heavy thump against my ribs. I'd been sleeping in this room, on this exact bed, since I was 18, right after Dad died. How had I never seen it? I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled against faded crimson velvet lining, were 3 things. The first was a small, tarnished silver key, the kind that looked like it belonged to an antique diary. The second was a brittle, yellowed photograph, slightly curled at the edges. It showed a young woman, stunningly familiar but not my mother, holding a newborn baby on a porch swing. The third item, however, made the air catch in my throat, stealing the breath I desperately needed to draw. It was a folded document, thick and official-looking, tied with a thin, fraying piece of black ribbon. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the silver key. I carefully picked up the document, my reflection staring back at me in the dark wood of the box, a stranger in my own home. I untied the ribbon, the paper crackling in protest, and unfolded the top sheet. The heading was embossed in severe black script, and as I read the first 3 words, the stable ground beneath my feet dissolved. It wasn't a deed, it wasn't a will, it was an adoption decree, finalized 32 years ago, with names I didn't recognize listed as biological parents, and my actual name printed clearly at the bottom, below the word adopted. But the real shockwave hit when I saw the date of birth, listed right above the signature of the adoption lawyer. It wasn't the date I celebrated every summer. It was 3 years earlier than I had ever been told, and standing right next to the listed father's name, a name I had never heard before, was the signature of my father, the man who had supposedly died in a car accident when I was 10. But this document was dated 5 years after that supposed accident. I looked back at the photograph, the beautiful, unfamiliar woman and the baby on the porch swing, and then down at the paper in my hands. My entire history, every memory, every shared story with the 2 people I loved most felt like ash crumbling between my fingers. If this was true, who was the man who taught me to ride a bike? And if he wasn't dead when I was 10, where the hell was he for the last 32 years? My head started spinning, the attic walls seeming to press in on me until my eyes locked onto a final, handwritten note tucked beneath the adoption papers, scrawled urgently on the back of a hospital discharge form. It was Mom's familiar, elegant handwriting, but the message was anything but familiar. He's looking for you, sweetie. Don't let him find this. Destroy it all and forget you ever saw this box. He's not who you think he is." I spun around, convinced Mom, who was supposed to be at her bridge club downtown, was standing right behind me, watching. The room was empty, save for the shadows. But as I clutched the documents, my gaze fell again to the mahogany box. Lying where the adoption papers had been, now resting starkly against the crimson velvet, was a single heavy brass shell casing, still slightly warm to the touch. The brass casing was terrifyingly real, squat and heavy in the hollow of my palm. It smelled faintly of sulfur and something metallic, something that hadn't belonged in this quiet, dust-filled suburban house. I dropped it back into the box, as if burned. A shell casing? This wasn't just a secret adoption. This felt like something ripped from a bad spy novel, something that explained why Mom, the sweet, slightly timid woman who worried about burnt toast, had written a panicked warning about someone looking for me. And who was he? The man on the adoption paper, the one whose signature implied he was alive and well 5 years after Dad's supposed demise. I scrambled backwards, knocking over the bed frame again. I had to talk to Mom. I needed to see her face when I confronted her with the evidence that our life was a carefully constructed fabrication. I snatched my phone from my pocket, dialing her number with a thumb that felt clumsy and foreign. Straight to voicemail. "Mom, call me back now. It's important." I kept my voice tight, trying to sound calm, like I was asking about picking up dry cleaning, not about the potential dismantling of my entire identity. I hung up before I could stammer out anything incriminating. I stuffed the box, the terrible damning box, under my arm and stumbled out of the attic, locking the door behind me with a decisive click. The hallway downstairs was eerily silent. The house felt different now. The framed family photos lining the stairs, Dad in his sensible blazer, Mom smiling radiantly at our wedding, looked like props in a play I had finally wandered onto the wrong stage of. My mind raced through the discrepancies. The date of birth that made me 3 years older than I thought. The dead father who was apparently alive and legally consenting to my adoption years later. The mysterious he Mom warned me about. And the shell casing, the undeniable proof that whatever secret this house held, it wasn't confined to paperwork. I needed context. I needed to see the photograph again under better light. I sprinted to my old bedroom downstairs, the one I used as a makeshift office now. I slammed the box onto my desk, nearly cracking the wood surface. The photograph. The woman wasn't just familiar. Looking closer at the sharp line of her jaw and the shape of her eyes, I recognized a distant, almost genetic echo of myself. The baby she held. Could that be me? The date on the document suggested I was born around the time Mom and Dad were supposedly deeply involved in their early marriage. If I was adopted, who were these people? And why the elaborate deception? I pulled up my browser, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. My first instinct was to search my father's name, the name on the official death certificate. But what if that wasn't his real name? I looked back at the adoption decree. The father listed there, Elias Thorne, was the unknown quantity. I typed it in, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The search results were minimal at first. A few outdated business listings, an expired LinkedIn profile. Then buried deep in a digitized archive of local police blotters from 20 years ago, the year my father supposedly died, a headline jumped out at me. Local businessman Elias Thorne found dead in interstate accident. I clicked the link, my breath hitching. The accompanying mugshot wasn't of the man I called Dad. It was of a stern-faced man with dark hair, almost identical to the man in the blurry adoption photograph. He looked nothing like the kindly, balding man who taught me to change the oil in my first car. This was impossible. If Elias Thorne was the biological father, and he died in that accident, then who was the man I mourned? And if that man wasn't my father, then who was he? I scrolled down the article, reading the grim details of the crash, and then I saw the secondary detail, the line that made my stomach drop out completely. The article noted that Mr. Thorne was found deceased along with an unidentified female passenger, believed to be his wife. I knew the timeline was fractured, but this new piece implied that Mom, the woman who raised me, was not only not my biological mother, but was potentially involved in the death of my actual father. Suddenly, the front door slammed open downstairs. It wasn't the sound of someone arriving home. It was loud, violent, as if kicked in. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't heard a car pull up. I hadn't heard keys rattling in the lock. Whoever it was, they were inside the house, and they hadn't bothered with subtlety. I looked wildly around the office. No time to hide the box. I snatched the adoption decree and the photograph, shoving them into the pocket of my jeans, leaving the ominous wooden box and the brass casing on the desk. I grabbed the only heavy object nearby, a bronze paperweight shaped like an owl, and crept toward the door, my muscles coiled tight. Footsteps sounded on the hardwood floor of the hall, heavy, measured, and coming toward the stairs. They paused right at the bottom landing. I held my breath, listening to the silence stretch until it was razor thin. Then, a voice, deep and gravelly, echoed up the stairwell, cutting through the quiet like a physical blow. It wasn't Mom. "I know you're up there." The lock on the attic door was a nice touch, but I saw the light under the gap when I came in. "Hand over what you took from the box, or we're going to have a long talk about your mother's promises." My mind scrambled for an escape route that didn't exist. The office only had one door facing the staircase. The window was a sheer drop onto the flagstone patio. Too risky, especially with adrenaline fogging my judgment. The gravelly voice repeated itself, closer now, accompanied by the slow, deliberate creak of the first stair under heavy weight. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, kid. The game's over. I just want what's mine." What's mine? Was he talking about the box, the documents, or was he talking about me? I pressed myself against the wall next to the doorframe, the owl paperweight digging painfully into my palm. I had to know who this man was. Was he Elias Thorne, the dead man from the report? If so, how was he standing at the bottom of my stairs? Or was he the shadowy he Mom warned me about? The possibilities were collapsing inward, each one more monstrous than the last. I risked a fractional peek around the door jamb. A figure stood at the base of the stairs, silhouetted against the light from the living room. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark utilitarian jacket. His face was obscured by shadow, but the way he carried himself, the coiled tension in his stance, screamed professional threat. This wasn't a concerned relative. This was someone who knew how to break things. The man shifted, and the overhead light caught a subtle, metallic glint on his belt. Not a phone, something heavier. I took a gamble. I had to create a diversion, no matter the cost. I flung the door open and hurled the bronze owl paperweight with every ounce of panic-fueled strength I possessed, aiming for the center of his chest. The man didn't flinch. He didn't even bother blocking it. The paperweight connected with a dull, sickening thud against what felt like solid oak, barely making him stagger. He recovered instantly, his head snapping up, his shadowed gaze locking onto mine with predatory focus. Amateur move, he spat. That moment of distraction was all I needed. I bolted past him, not toward the front door, but deeper into the house, toward the kitchen and the back exit. I could hear him recovering, his heavy boots hitting the hardwood floor as he started the pursuit. He wasn't running. He was pacing me, confident he had me cornered. I slammed through the kitchen, knocking over a wicker fruit basket. The back door was agonizingly far, bolted shut. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers slick with sweat, hearing his heavy breathing closing in behind me. "Stop now," he commanded. I yanked the door open just as his hand clamped down on my shoulder. The force spun me around, slamming me against the doorframe. The pain was blinding, but adrenaline kept me upright. He had me pinned. His grip was immense, crushing bone beneath the heavy fabric of his coat. "The documents," he growled, his breath hot and stale against my ear. "Where are the adoption papers?" I fought against his grip, kicking out blindly. My heel connected with his shin, a weak impact, but enough to make him momentarily loosen his hold as a sharp intake of breath escaped him. I wrenched free and threw myself backward through the doorway, stumbling onto the back lawn. I didn't look back. I sprinted across the manicured grass toward the thick line of overgrown cedar trees that marked the property line. Behind me, I heard the kitchen door slam open again, followed by the unmistakable click of a weapon being armed. I dove headfirst into the dense, scratchy undergrowth of the hedges, heedless of the thorns tearing at my skin. I could hear him crashing through the yard behind me, his steps surprisingly fast for such a large man. "You can run, but you can't hide secrets forever," he shouted, his voice now strained with exertion. I burrowed deeper, crawling blindly through the roots and wet earth until I hit the fence separating our yard from the neighbor's property. I braced my hands against the rough wood and prepared to haul myself over when my pocket snagged. The documents. The brittle old paper was tearing against the splintered wood. I paused, pulling gently, trying to save the proof, when a sharp, intense pressure exploded in my lower back. It wasn't the bullet I expected, not the clean crack of a gunshot. Instead, it was a blinding, shocking jolt of electricity, a searing burn that ripped through my core, instantly paralyzing my legs. I cried out, not from pain, but from the sheer, overwhelming shock wave that seized every muscle. I pitched forward over the fence, collapsing onto the neighbor's immaculate lawn, my body twitching uncontrollably. As I lay there, helpless and scorched, staring up at the darkening sky, I saw the man appear at the top of the fence line. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a small black device with a long antenna aimed directly at me. He lowered the weapon, a grim smile finally touching his lips. "The taser was just a warning shot, kid," he said, his voice devoid of emotion now. He vaulted the fence with terrifying ease and strode toward my paralyzed form. "Now let's talk about who really killed Elias Thorne and why your mother sold you to cover the mess." He knelt beside me, reaching into my pocket for the torn documents. But as his fingers brushed the edge of the photograph, his eyes widened fractionally, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his hardened face. He snatched the photo, holding it up to the faint porch light of the neighboring house, his gaze fixed not on the woman or the baby, but on something small, almost hidden in the background of the picture. He dropped the photograph as if it were toxic, scrambling backward, a single choked word escaping his lips. "Impossible, impossible," he whispered again, his composure utterly shattered. The professional predator had dissolved, replaced by a man staring at something truly terrifying. He didn't seem to care about the adoption papers or the shell casing anymore. His entire focus was fixated on the small, blurry detail he'd glimpsed in the background of the porch swing photograph. I tried desperately to move, to force a scream past the metallic taste in my mouth left by the stun device, but my limbs remained leaden, alien things detached from my will. I could only watch, helpless, as the intruder, whoever he was, began to back away, his breathing ragged. He looked from the photograph clutched in his hand to me, then back to the photo, as if trying to reconcile two realities that refused to align. "That can't be," he muttered, shaking his head violently. "That changes everything." He didn't reach for me again. Instead, with a sudden, decisive movement, he crushed the photograph in his fist and turned, sprinting back toward the fence with a panicked urgency that belied his earlier arrogance. He cleared the barrier in a single desperate leap, disappearing back into the shadows of my own backyard. The paralyzing effect of the stun device began to ebb, starting as a furious buzzing under my skin, slowly yielding to agonizing pins and needles. It felt like 1,000 tiny needles being driven into my muscles, but with the pain came the blessed return of control. I gasped, sucking air into my burning lungs, tasting the cool evening dew mixed with the coppery tang of fear. I forced myself onto my elbows, then slowly, agonizingly, pulled my trembling body over the fence and stumbled onto my neighbor's pristine lawn. My own backyard looked like a battleground, uprooted hedges, scuff marks on the grass, and the ominous silhouette of the house standing silent, as if daring me to return. I didn't need to go back. The man had fled, taking the photograph and leaving me with the burning certainty that the secret wasn't just about who my parents were, but what they were protecting me from. If that one detail in the background of the photo caused a professional operative to bolt like a frightened child, that detail was the linchpin of this entire fabricated life. I crawled toward the safety of the sidewalk, finally managing to sit up. My phone was gone, lost somewhere in the chaos of the initial discovery in the attic. I was alone, injured, and carrying the knowledge that my entire existence was built on a lie involving a supposedly dead man, a secret adoption, and a potentially murderous third party. Suddenly, headlights swept across the front of the neighbor's house, blinding me. A car screeched to a halt at the curb. Not a police car, not an ambulance, but a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. The driver's side door opened and a figure emerged. This one moved with a different kind of grace, smooth, economical, and terrifyingly familiar. It was my mother. She wasn't wearing her usual floral cardigan. She was dressed in tailored black slacks and a crisp white blouse, looking more poised and lethal than I had ever seen her. She wasn't panicked. She was methodical. She surveyed the damage in the yard, her eyes sweeping over the disturbed hedges, lingering for a moment on the spot where I'd been stunned. She looked up, spotting me huddled on the neighbor's lawn, clearly shaking but mobile. Her expression didn't change from its cool neutrality. "Well, that was sloppy, dear," she said, her voice perfectly level, completely unlike the frantic scrawl on the hospital note. She walked toward me, her expensive leather shoes barely disturbing the lawn. "I told you not to look in that box." I stared up at her, my heart sinking further than it had all day. The shock of the stun device wore off, replaced by a cold, devastating clarity. The warning note, the frantic fear. It hadn't been about protecting me from him. It had been a desperate, last-ditch attempt at misdirection. "Mom, who are you?" I managed to croak, the question heavy with betrayal. She stopped a few feet away, tilting her head slightly, the afternoon sun glinting off something metallic just beneath the cuff of her blouse. A small holster, perhaps? "I am the woman who kept you safe," she corrected me softly, "and now you've made things very difficult. You see, when I left that box for you to find, I needed you to believe the lie was fragile enough to break. I needed you to be desperate enough to run so that he would come for the photo." She took another step closer, and this time she reached into her blouse, drawing out not a weapon, but a small, silver flip phone, the same design as the key I'd found in the box, only slightly larger. The man who just fled, Elias Thorne's original partner, he's been hunting me, hunting us for 30 years, thinking I killed Elias and stole his leverage. That photo confirmed for him that I'm still alive and that you have inherited my secrets. She paused, her eyes locking onto mine, suddenly cold and ruthless. "But now you've seen too much, and you've seen what he saw in that picture. And that means you are no longer just a liability I need to hide." She flipped the phone open, revealing a glowing green screen. "It means," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "that you are the only living link to the syndicate's real assets, assets I've spent my entire life protecting you from. Which is why I have to make a choice, darling. Do I let you run, or do I bring you back into the fold and teach you how to finish what your real father started?" She held the phone up, her thumb hovering over a single large glowing red button labeled simply "Activate." The red button pulsed on the screen of the silver phone, a digital countdown to either my salvation or my complete erasure. My mother, my carefully constructed, loving lie, stood over me, not as a panicked protector, but as a calculating operative assessing a strategic asset. The betrayal was a physical weight, heavier than the paralysis had been. "What syndicate?" I managed to force out, the words scraping against my throat. "What did my real father start?" Her expression tightened, a microsecond of true anguish flashing across her composed features before the mask snapped back into place. "Your father, the man who adopted you, he was my partner. We ran interference. We buried the truth about Elias Thorne and the operations he controlled. When Elias died, we thought we had won. We built this life for you, a simple, quiet lie, so you would never be found by the people he owed everything to. But you found the box, and now the wolves are circling." She glanced quickly over her shoulder towards the dark recesses of my own backyard, as if expecting the operative, Elias's former partner, to materialize again. That man saw the photo and recognized the reflection of the syndicate's primary weakness, a weakness I thought I had neutralized decades ago. But you, sweet girl, you were the living proof of my failure to completely clean up the mess. The tension was suffocating. I searched her eyes, desperately looking for the warmth of the mother I thought I knew, but finding only the hard, polished surface of a survivor. "What's on the red button, Mom?" I pleaded, forcing the last vestiges of strength into my voice. "If you activate it, what happens?" A cruel, almost pitying smile touched her lips. "It sends a beacon. It tells the agency exactly where I am, and more importantly, where the other asset is, the one Elias Thorne truly valued, the one that's worth more than a lifetime of secrets." My breath hitched. The other asset. Was that the woman in the photograph, my biological mother, or something else entirely? "And if I don't press it?" I asked, my gaze flicking between her face and the glowing button. "Then he comes back, and he won't be leaving you paralyzed on the lawn. He will take you, and you will wish you had the peace of the grave your adoptive father gave you." The moment hung suspended, the ultimate Sophie's choice delivered by the one person who was supposed to shield me from impossible decisions. Run and be hunted by the syndicate, or call the agency and surrender to an entirely different, unknown authority. Suddenly, a high-pitched, insistent beeping emanated from her pocket, cutting through the standoff. It wasn't the silver phone. It was the small, heavy phone from my lost office, the one I'd forgotten I had tucked in my own pocket when I fled. My mother's eyes snapped towards the noise, her attention momentarily divided. In that instant, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't trust the agency, and I couldn't surrender to the hunter. The only person I could potentially control in this equation was the one who had fled in fear. With a raw scream born of desperation, I lunged sideways, not at her, but toward the dark edge of the neighbor's yard where the operative had disappeared. I scrambled into the shadows, ignoring the lingering spasms in my legs. "No!" my mother roared, the cool facade finally shattering. She brought the silver phone up, her thumb slamming down on the red button just as I disappeared behind a large oak tree. The beacon was sent. The agency was alerted. But as I dove behind the tree trunk, I didn't feel the relief of escape. I felt the sudden, terrifying weight of a heavy object connecting solidly with the back of my head. I didn't see who struck me, only registering the impact as the world dissolved into spinning darkness. My last conscious thought as I crumpled to the cold, damp earth was the memory of the operative's horrified expression when he looked at the photograph. He hadn't seen a weakness. He had seen a double. And the only thing that could cause that kind of panic wasn't a secret asset. It was the realization that he hadn't been chasing the right target at all. I didn't know if the operative or my mother had struck the blow, or if the agency had arrived impossibly fast. All I knew was the crushing silence descending upon me, followed by the distinct crisp sound of a car door closing softly and the low murmur of two voices conferring nearby. Voices that sounded neither like my mother's nor the gravelly operative's. They sounded calm, authoritative, and they were talking about me, using a name I had never heard before. Subject Delta is secured. Transport commencing. Let's hope the original data regarding the true inheritor of the Thorn legacy is still intact.